Chapter 109 Soulmates. Picking himself up from the floor, Sunny staggered and found his way back to the fire burning under the improvised grill. Glancing at the motionless stone knight, he spat a bit more blood and groaned. As the appetizing aroma of roasting meat filled the air, the Bloodweave got busy repairing his body. By the time his supper was ready, Sunny was able to breathe without wincing. Putting the meat on his prized possession, the luxurious silver plate, Sunny prepared to eat. On the forgotten shore, simple everyday necessities like plates were rarer than enchanted swords and magical suits of armor. In the whole Cur City, only Gunlog and his 5 lieutenants were able to dine with as much decorum as Sunny. Granted, he had yet to find even a single pair of chopsticks in this whole damn place, let alone something more technologically advanced, like a spoon. Of course, Sunny could try and make one himself, but that wasn't the same thing. The Shadow Saint was silently looking at him with her burning ruby eyes. Feeling uncomfortable under her mysterious gaze, Sunny glanced at his plate, then at the menacing stone creature. You want some?" He raised a piece of meat and offered it to the taciturn monster. However, the stone saint showed no reaction at all. "Well, suit yourself." Using the prowling thorn as a kitchen utensil, Sunny dug in, devouring the juicy meat like a starving animal. With not a single human soul around, he didn't bother with table manners at all. That's the life. His perpetually hungry outskirt self would have been really shocked to see this extravagant feast. That was real meat. He had hunted and prepared it himself, no less. More than that, he got to enjoy a similar type of luxury food almost every day. Of course, that real meat had come from a revolting horror of a monster, but these were just small details. Chewing on the last piece with a sense of deep satisfaction, Sunny thoughtfully looked at the stone saint. It was time to continue. Earlier, he wanted to see if there was a possible synergy between the different powers that his aspect possessed. Namely, if the enhancement provided by shadow control could be applied to shadows. Sunny knew that his shadow was able to enhance his body, his memories, and with lesser effect, various inanimate objects. However, it was unable to enhance other humans and memories that belonged to them, as well as any living creature except for Sunny himself. He had secretly tested it during his travels with Nephice and Cassie to come up with this conclusion. More importantly, it couldn't affect echoes. But what about shadows? Giving a mental command, Sunny sent his shadow in the direction of the stone saint and held his breath. Flowing like water, the shadow silently grasped the statuesque monster in its dark embrace. Then, it seemed to disappear, as though absorbed by the stone flesh of the tenebrous night. A moment later, Stone Saint's ruby eyes blazed with crimson fire. Her smooth granite skin shined with dark radiance once again, smoky wisps of the ghostly gray fog oozing from beneath her stone-like armor like dancing flames. Suddenly, it felt as though the temperature in the hidden chamber dropped by a couple of degrees. Shadows around the menacing creature seemed to swell, becoming deeper and darker, like a vast mantle sewn from boundless empty blackness. The elegant stone saint had always looked dangerous and deadly, but now, she was downright fearsome. Even without having the shadow saint strike him again, Sunny could tell that the experiment ended in a resounding success. It was apparent that the two types of his shadows were practically created for each other. Her power was increased twofold, at least. A bit peeved, he looked down and sighed. Why does she look so much cooler than I do when using the shadow? Shouldn't it be the other way around? I'm the true divine shadow here, me. Where's my aura of mysterious coolness? Shaking his head, Sunny lamented his lack of good looks and simultaneously congratulated himself on becoming the master of such a stylish monster. Technically, it didn't matter how his shadows looked, just as long as they were powerful. However, he was secretly glad that his first shadow was not only powerful, but also a darkly beautiful sight to behold. Killing monsters was great, but killing monsters while looking good was even better. Wait. If she can use my shadow, what else can she use? Suddenly excited, Sunny finally swallowed the half-forgotten piece of meat and dismissed the stone saint. Then, he shifted his perspective to look at the soul sea and summoned her again, this time inside it. The shadow appeared in the whirlwind of black flames and stood motionlessly upon the still waters of the silent sea. Her mysterious ruby eyes stared at him through the narrow visor of her stone helmet. Not wasting any time, Sunny looked up at the spheres of light circling around the shadow core. What if I can equip her with actual memories? What to choose? She was extremely strong and very proficient with her round shield, so wasn't it logical to assume that a tower shield would suit her even better? Coincidentally, he happened to have one of those. Sunny summoned the memory that he had gotten in one of the fights on the streets of the cursed city. It was a large, square tower shield that was almost as tall as him. The thing was too heavy and unwieldy to actually use in combat, at least not by Sunny. Plus, he wielded a tachi, which could only perform to its full potential while held in both hands. Grabbing the cumbersome shield, Sunny walked over to the Shadow Saint and handed it to her with a hopeful smile. Here. Take this. Please? The shadow stared at him for a few moments, then lowered her head and glanced at the tower shield. Come on, take it. His heart skipped a bit when the statuesque creature slowly raised her hands and grasped the memory with her stone gauntlets. Yes, that's right. Now use it. The stone saint obediently brought the shield to her chest. And then shattered it. Sunny froze, his mouth hanging open. Your memory has been destroyed. What? The shards of the broken memory turned into a river of tiny sparks of light, just like the echo of the carapace scavenger, and the azure blade had done before disappearing forever. My tower shield! Sunny felt a sharp dagger of sorrow stab at his heart. Yes, the shield was of no use to him. But it would sell for so much money in the real world. Why did this evil thing have to break it? Why? Wasn't his beautiful chair enough? He gazed at the tiny sparks, wanting to cry. However, a moment later, his eyes widened. Because the river of sparks did not disappear. Instead, it circled around the stone saint's body and then suddenly flowed through it, separating into two streams. Each stream was then absorbed by one of the dark embers burning in the depths of the living shadow that was hiding inside the monster's body. Sunny blinked. Stone Saint has grown stronger. Chapter 110 Memento. Sunny stared at the Shadow Saint, dumbfounded. The storm of emotions that the destruction of the tower's shield had produced was still tugging on his heartstrings, but now, an equally powerful feeling was slowly welling up in his chest. Not knowing how to process all of this, he simply blinked a couple of times and said in a flat tone, "Huh! So, let me get this straight." He gave the shield to his pet monster hoping that she would be able to use it. And she did, sort of. It's just that instead of wielding the memory, she ate it. Sunny hesitated for a few moments, wondering if he had finally lost it. But no, the echo of the spell's voice was still resounding above the dark waters, whispering the same phrase over and over again. Stone Saint has grown stronger. With a heavy sigh, Sunny summoned the runes and found the description of the shadow. Down at the very bottom of it, the runes were slightly changed, shadow fragments, 2/200. A wild gleam appeared in his eyes. 2 fragments. He had received the memory of the tower's shield after slaying a particularly hardy wraith, who, despite its frightening appearance, had turned out to be merely an awakened monster. For killing it, Sunny himself had received 4 shadow fragments. But that was because his own shadow core was dormant, and as such, he always got double the reward in battles against creatures of the higher rank, 2 for each soul core that an awakened creature possessed. The Stone Saint was such a creature herself, so it was logical to assume that she would not receive the same treatment. The tower's shield had come from a monster with 2 awakened cores, so she received 2 fragments for consuming its memory. Which meant that, with a fire of excitement burning in his eyes, Sunny hurriedly summoned another memory. A disgusting eye with a menacing vertical pupil appeared from the dissipating brightness of the descending sphere of light. That eye came from a basilisk-like creature that Sunny had killed a few weeks ago. To survive the battle, he had to fight it with his own eyes closed, relying solely on the shadow sense to move through the rubble and dodge the attacks of the deadly beast. In the end, he had beheaded the vile thing with a slash of his swift blade seconds before being ripped apart by its claws. It was a fine test for his nascent combat skill. Sadly, the memory came with none of the powers that the actual beast had possessed. It was only capable of producing a harmless beam of red light, which could only be used for creating mood lighting, at least in the case of Sunny, who could see in the dark. Grabbing the eye, he held it out for the stone saint to take. The shadow grasped the disgusting thing, brought it to her chest, and then crushed it in her armored fist. Once again, the memory disintegrated into countless tiny sparks of ethereal light, which were then absorbed by the darkness hiding inside the elegant creature's body. Stone Saint has grown stronger. Sunny grinned, then threw his head back and laughed. So that's how it was, the shadows fed on memories. They consumed them to receive power, just like he killed nightmare creatures to consume the remnants of their shadows. To make sure, he glanced at the runes again and saw exactly what he had expected to see: shadow fragments, 3 out of 200. To one awakened memory, 1 fragment. Makes sense. Giddy with anticipation, Sunny summoned the next memory. A bulky suit of rusty plate armor appeared from the sphere of light and hovered in the air in front of him. This one he had received after burning the towering nest of monstrous, flesh-devouring termites to the ground. Creating a bonfire in the absolute darkness of the Forgotten Shores night was a dangerous endeavor, but he had hoped to receive hundreds of shadow fragments by eviscerating the whole swarm of these tiny gluttonous creatures. Judging by the amount of bones littering the ground around the nest, they were a real plague. Sadly, the entire colony had turned out to be a single demonic being, landing him only 6 fragments. He even had to retreat without collecting the soul shards from the smoldering remains of the hive, scared away by the approach of several fallen horrors that had been attracted by the bright flames. The memory was of little consolation, since his own puppeteer's shroud was superior to it in all regards. But now, finally, it could be of use. The stone saint devoured the armor just like she had devoured the over 2 memories. Once again, the spell announced that the shadow monster had grown stronger. The runes changed again: shadow fragments, 6 out of 200. Every time the numbers changed, Sunny felt a deep sense of satisfaction. His menacing stone knight was becoming more fearsome with each second. He suspected that gambling addicts felt something similar in the throes of a rare winning streak. Caught in the moment, he grasped the next memory, but then stopped and stared at the small silver bell that lay silently in his hand. This one was the first memory he had ever received, barely holding on to life in the bitter cold and terror of the first nightmare. It was the weakest memory he had, but also the most meaningful. Sunny had killed one human to receive it, and had used it to kill another. The silver bell was a reminder. With bleak eyes, he read the runes that shimmered in the lightless emptiness of his soul, a small memento of a long-lost home, which once brought its owner comfort and joy. Suddenly drained of the excitement that had been consuming him just a few moments ago, Sunny sighed heavily and dismissed the memory. There was a dark expression on his face. Glancing at the motionless shadow saint, he turned away. "That's enough for today. What a long day. I think I'll go to sleep now." Leaving the soul sea, he stood silently for a few minutes, then slowly walked to his bed and fell on it. Dismissing the puppeteer's shroud, Sunny wrapped himself in the blanket and closed his eyes. He was so tired. Chapter 111 Lesser Creature. Sunny woke up from the oppressive feeling that drowned the whole world. The sunset was drawing near, and with it, the abyssal shadow of the Crimson Spire had once again fallen on the cursed city. The distant spire could be seen from anywhere in these somber ruins, looming over the forgotten shore like an eternal dark omen. It was cyclopean and unimaginably high, with its roots growing from the endless sea of crimson coral, and its peak lost somewhere beyond the veil of gray clouds. In these past few months, Sunny had gotten accustomed to its presence and learned to not pay it any attention. Thinking about the spire was a sure road to madness. After all, somewhere inside that inconceivable structure lay their only hope of ever returning home. And hope was a poison. Yawning, Sunny stood up and stretched his arms. His good mood, which he had momentarily lost for some strange reason, was already returning. Now that he had some time to put the events of the previous night into perspective, he understood even more clearly how amazing his luck had been recently. The acquisition of the Stone Saint and her following transformation into a shadow were nothing short of miraculous. His life was about to change for the better. However, Sunny had to think things through thoroughly. He was in uncharted waters in regards to how to cultivate his pet monster. The initial excitement he felt after realizing that the Shadow Saint was capable of consuming memories to collect shadow fragments was gone. In its place, there now was a series of uncomfortable questions. Sunny had spent somewhere around 6 months on the Forgotten Shore. In all this time, he had only been able to collect 3 memories that were suitable to be fed to the shadow, giving her mere 6 shadow fragments. With the current speed of progression, he would have to wait for 16 full years to see his labor bear fruit, and find out what exactly was going to happen once the Stone Saint had accumulated all 200 shadow fragments that the runes demanded. Even among the elites of Gunlog's army, there was no one who had survived on the Forgotten Shore for more than 10 years. The king of the castle himself had only been here for 8, and only lived that long in large part due to luck. Granted, Sunny's battle ability would grow dramatically once the Deadly Stone Knight was added into the equation, but still, it was too long. He had to think of something. While he was doing the math, Sunny's eyes fell on the iron chest that stored his painstakingly accumulated fortune of soul shards. Distracted, he froze for a few moments, then hesitantly approached the chest and stared at its lid. By the standards of the Forgotten Shore, he was an incredibly rich man. His fortune could buy him a lot of things in the castle, from comparatively simple to increasingly rare and hard to come by. Some of the things that could be easily bought in that pit of despair he didn't even want to think about. What interested him the most, however, was the possibility of acquiring a large amount of memories. Powerful memories with useful enchantments were not cheap. In fact, they were extremely expensive. But he didn't really care about the quality. Since Stone Saint could get the same amount of fragments from the most useless of memories, all he needed was quantity. If he were to spend all of his shards, her power would instantly leap by a considerable amount. In the future, he would be able to cultivate the shadow at double the speed, too, half of the materials coming from the memories he would be acquiring from slaying monsters, the other from the memories he would be buying with the soul shards the monsters had left behind. That would potentially reduce the overall time frame to a somewhat sensible period. However, there was a big problem with this plan. Once Sunny began to spend a large number of soul shards, he would inevitably draw a lot of attention. Dealing with random daredevils who would try to rob him, while not pleasant, was not a big problem. But if Gunlog himself were to become interested in his exploits, that would spell disaster. And then there was Nephis, whose presence made any sort of planning futile for reasons that only she and Sunny knew. Everyone else seemed to be blind and deaf to the truth, which was the source of the problem. Sunny frowned and turned away from the chest. I might come back to this idea later. But first, I'll have to check if consuming memories is the only way for a shadow to grow stronger. He still wanted to know if the Stone Saint could absorb shadow fragments by slaying nightmare creatures, just like he could. Some time later, Sunny was cautiously moving through the stone maze of the Forsaken City. Able to become one with the shadows, he had a certain advantage over anyone else who would dare to explore these cursed ruins in the absolute darkness of the night. However, even he was always just one step away from death. Attracting the attention of the real masters of the streets, the fallen creatures who dwelled here from the ancient times, would be the end of him. Sunny had no illusions about that. Humans only survived here by learning how to avoid the fallen ones and seek out weaker monsters to hunt. There weren't a lot of lesser creatures who were able to secure a foothold in the cursed city, so hunting them was always dangerous. Nevertheless, that was what Sunny had made into his profession, and that was what he was doing now. Finally, he reached the area where he had observed a particular creature in the past. Surprisingly, Sunny was intimately familiar with that type of monster. After all, one of them had almost cost him his life in the past. Somewhere around this particular street, a lone carapace centurion had made its lair. Climbing atop a tall stone column, Sunny stood motionlessly in the darkness and waited for his prey to appear. Time moved excruciatingly slowly, but a good hunter had to have a lot of patience. His dark eyes pierced the veil of night, observing the ghostly ruins. 1 hour passed, then another. Sunny waited. Soon, his patience was finally rewarded. From the deep darkness of one of the toppled buildings, a familiar hulking shape appeared in all its menacing beauty. The carapace centurion stepped onto the cobblestones, his black carapace decorated with crimson patterns, 2 terrifying bone scythes scraping against the stone. Sunny smiled. The carapace centurion only had time to take a single step before 2 crimson flames suddenly ignited in the deep shadows that consumed the ruined street. Then, a graceful stone knight stepped out of the darkness. Raising her shield, she rested the blade of her sword on its rim. Wisps of ghostly gray fog were seeping from under her armor, a strange dark radiance emanating from her skin. The darkness around seemed to move, as though wanting to embrace her like a dark mantle. The 2 monsters, one massive and savage, one small and steadfast, froze opposite each other. And then, all hell broke loose.